Welcome to another episode of I'm Dying to Tell You. This is Dr. Mark Goulston. I'm not going to die soon, but it looks like I'm going to die a lot sooner than I planned. And what I want to do is share things that I've learned from a lifetime of listening. You can see that book over my shoulder, and I want to share it with you, and I hope it'll make your lives better. Today, what I want to focus on is marriages with children of Gen X, Gen Y, and Gen Z couples, especially entrepreneurs, because there is an epidemic that I think is upon us from what I've noticed in a lot of young couples, especially when young couples have children. I wrote an article for Newsweek called Married with Children Displaced Anger Epidemic. And there's an upcoming one called the 7-Year Itch 2.0. And I'm going to cover both of them in this particular episode. Married with Children Displaced Anger Epidemic. What that's about is that a lot of young couples, and if you're from those generations, Gen X, Y, or Z, before you had children, you talked faster than we baby boomers could even think. I mean, you were very impatient. You got what each other was talking about, and you were just moving along, running full bore on adrenaline and excitement. But when you have a child, when you have an infant requires a kind of patience that many of you don't have. And it requires a kind of tolerance that many of you don't have and you didn't need. But what happens is when both of you are working, especially a working mom who's exhausted, and she's the primary caregiver to your young child, that child is exhausting. That child often doesn't sleep through the night. That child will not feed. And what happens, and it's only human, so if you're one of those young moms, it's okay what I'm about to say, you get really angry at that infant. You feel like yelling at them, just finish feeding, just go to sleep, will you? Because you're all exhausted. And you don't want to yell at your child, because if you yell at your child, you're going to think you're a terrible mom. And what happens is you displace your anger from your child on your also exhausted working husband who comes home. As a result, many husbands feel like whatever they do when they come home is wrong. And the point is, young mothers and young wives are wanting to find what you did wrong, often a simple thing, because they want to displace their anger at you instead of giving in and yelling at your child, your infant, your toddler, and feeling awful. Now, one of the things that happens rarely, and it would help this, is when a young, working, overwhelmed mom says to her husband, I think I'm a terrible mom. I'm not sure I should have had children. I'm not sure we should have had children, because I came really close to yelling my child. I almost wanted to shake him or her. And if I did that, I'd be abusive. I think I'm awful. And if you were to share that with your husband, and he, for a change, was out of the crosshairs of doing something wrong, and he cared about you, he would smile and say, you're a great mom. You're just exhausted. You're overwhelmed. It'll be okay. But rarely do young moms open up and share this. Instead, they displace their anger at their husbands. Now I want to cross over to something else I've written called the 7-Year Itch 2.0. In the 1950s, there was a famous play and a famous movie called The 7-Year Itch. In fact, the movie starred Marilyn Monroe, and I believe it's the movie in which she famously was over some event in New York and her dress blew up. And that was one of the most iconic images from that entire decade. And what the 7-year itch was about, it was the idea that 7 years into a marriage, sometimes romance fades. And also, not only does romance fade, it makes husbands prone to infidelity. And the 7-year itch is back. What's the reason for that? It's because if you've been married 7 years, and let's say you had a child and your child's about 4 or 5 or maybe 6, because you're getting married older, when they get to be 5 or 6 or 7, you as the dad and your child have a bond. Your child says, "Daddy," when you come home. It's wonderful. You smile at your child smiles at you. You try to look at your spouse, and neither of you smile at each other. And so what happens is you feel a bond to your child. You feel, I think I'm going to have a relationship with this kid or these kids because I can feel the bond. And if there's enough money from both of you working, or maybe by this time, if you as the husband are the main supporter, you're going to reach a point where you feel the bond to your child, and you're going to feel that you do nothing right at home. And when you're on a business trip, when you're meeting with a client somewhere a distance from home, when you're meeting with an associate, and those people are women, and they look up at you and they think you're just so smart and you're just so amazing, and they flicker their eyes at you, and you may say things, blurt things out that can make things get really uncomfortable. More frequently, you're both feeling it. Part of the 7-year itch 2.0 is when you're away on a trip and you're with someone and they look at you with a look that says, "You're amazing. You can't do anything wrong." And then you come home to everything you do is wrong. My concern is, and I think there's going to be an epidemic, where if you can afford a divorce, you're going to say to your spouse, "Look, I don't make you happy. You don't make me happy. We both love our children. Let's do this in an agreeable way. And why don't we just go our separate ways?" Now, that may be fine in the heat of anger for both spouses. But one of the concerns I would have, especially for the newly divorced young mom with 2 children, is it's going to be tough to find another relationship. Because by this time you're pushing 40, you've got 2 kids, and it's going to be tough for someone to take that on unless they truly love you and you truly love them. And they, by the way, may have a couple children of their own because they got divorced, and then you would blend your families. And I'm not against that, but I'm just trying to help you be aware of this. So what can you do to prevent this? Write this down. Better to be proactive than reactive. If I were to ask you, what is the likelihood when you're in a reactive mood or mindset of making a bad situation worse? It's close to 100%. Now, maybe you vent, you get it off your chest, and afterwards you apologize and you make up, but still, there's a great possibility that when you're in a reactive mindset, that you'll make something worse. On the other hand, when you can be proactive, you can prevent things. So the suggestion I'm offering you couples, if any of what I'm saying is relevant to your marriage, is that you proactively schedule at least once a month, maybe 2 weeks, but once a month, a dinner. And the sole purpose of that dinner is each of you bring up what gets in the way of the other person putting a smile on your face, or you're putting a smile on their face, because once upon a time when you fell in love, you put a smile on each other's face. And if either of you can't smile at the other person, or you feel you don't make the other person smile, you got a problem. So the purpose of this once a month dinner is that you bring up any and all things that are getting in the way of you smiling at each other and meaning it. Any and all things that you're either doing or fail to do that might be causing that. Also, you need to have ground rules. If one person brings something up and the other person gets defensive, one of the ground rules, if you're getting defensive or angry, well, maybe you can't control it and you vent. But the commitment is if you vent, you got to keep talking until you're talking from the hurt and fear underneath the anger. What's the hurt? Your relationship is turned to a place where neither of you respect each other, neither of you like each other. That really hurts. Especially hurts when you don't feel your partner respects you and you don't feel you respect them. That really hurts. And then the fear is it's going to build up. It's going to blow up. We're going to get divorced. So yes, you can vent, but you have to keep talking till you're talking about the hurt or the fear underneath it all. Also, the conversation needs to include an expression of appreciation for something that they did or something they held back on doing, when they could have really beat you up verbally. If it's gone into beating up physically, you got real problems. So you need to express to each other something you're appreciative of. And then what you want to express is an apology. And the apology needs to be for something that you did or something you failed to do. And it needs to come from your heart. Something that I'm suggesting to entrepreneurial couples, especially with the entrepreneur spouse, is an alpha. Can be a male, can be a female, but they love that energy. They love that adrenaline rush. And what takes a hit is oxytocin, emotional closeness. And something that can save a marriage, but if you're that entrepreneurial alpha person, these will be daunting questions, but they might just save your relationship. The first one, and you can do this when you're having that once a month meeting, is to say, have I ever made you feel lonely? And have I ever made you feel that your feelings weren't worth my listening to? Let them answer. And then say, tell me about an incident where I was at my worst, where you felt so lonely, you thought, what am I doing in this relationship? Or you felt so hurt, you didn't know how you were going to get out of it. And when they tell you, don't get defensive. Don't say, I don't remember. Instead, look into your spouse's eyes that you have treated that way. And when you look into their eyes, and they may not be looking at you because they may be crying, because they're able to say something that never comes up and gets out. So they may be crying. And then you tell them to look at you, and you look into their eyes. And when you look into their eyes, you remember the person you fell in love with. You remember the person who not only put a smile on your face and you put one on theirs, you adored each other. And look into that person's eyes who you once adored and who once adored you. And say to yourself, what have I done to that person? And then you say to them, look at me. And they may not look at you because this is kind of intimate. And you look into their eyes and you say, I did that. I did that on many occasions. And you deserve better. And I'm going to fix this. And I'm sorry. But if you do that, you got to make good on it. And I know this is a scary conversation, but it might just flip a switch and it might just save your marriage. So I hope you'll give that some thought. And as with all my other episodes of I'm Dying to Tell You, feel free to disregard it. Feel free to send me comments like, why don't you die, old man? I can take it. I don't think it'll speed things up. So until next time, take good care.